Awesome. Hey, how about that? I got to upgrade my position. Never works with airlines, but sometimes it works at conferences. I don't have to go to the end of the day, but I do have that bewitching hour right at the after lunch. I've been around the block in security. I am typically enterprise focused, do most of my work with enterprises, so every once in a while I wonder if some of these concepts don't make sense to folks who are not within that enterprise realm. Economic entities are my thing. That's what I try to protect. Been doing, was a practitioner, an auditor, all sorts of different things. These concepts are really intriguing to me because on the one hand, I think of them as sort of mundane and routine in lots of other domains other than security. On the other hand, it's not clear to me that we apply them particularly well within the security domain. So my goal is to try to take economics concepts and financial concepts and try to find a way to get to help our security profession get smarter about the way we make decisions. So first things first, I had a problem, right? My CIO came to me and I got all excited because he said, Pete, we got this signature-based endpoint anti-malware and we got this machine learning-based anti-malware, and one's $10 a head and the other's $50 a head. Should I do it? What should I do? Should I upgrade to anti-malware, to the machine learning-based stuff? And I said, oh, this is my perfect opportunity to show the CIO how things should work. First thing we want to do is calculate cost. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about cost, by the way, as we move forward. This is the easy part of the presentation. Second thing gets a little harder, right? We got to figure out a way to estimate losses, and then finally we have to compare and contrast different options. There's a little trick in here that I haven't shown here, which basically I set our estimated risk loss to 1 for the existing solution that we have as a way to then project out to the other alternative solutions to address one of these problems. So I thought I was dandy, going, well, what really just matters is whether this new solution is going to reduce enough risk to account for the added expense, right? And it's pretty basic, straightforward kind of cost-benefit justification. But we don't do things that way. He said, well, what goes on? And the sad little part of my story, I'm not being recorded, I'm like, oh, hi, Mitchell. He said, yeah, no, I just want to know. Should I do it? And so the problem is not the model. The problem is belief in the model, trust that it makes sense, and kind of the value proposition associated with it. So I get to come up with these cute little formulas where I probably bastardize all sorts of scientific notation. My apologies. I try to be specific, but I'm actually a pedestrian at heart. I really want to be in the enterprise making changes here. So I have this formula on risk reduced, but it's all very straightforward stuff, right? It is essentially we want to reduce more risk than the amount of money that we're spending to try to reduce risk, right? Very basic. So the problem, as I see it, as I reframe this sort of belief in the numbers, is how do I start determining whether my program is effective or ineffective? I love different charts, and one of the things I think I'm going to bring to the table here is pulling from all sorts of different domains the same kinds of activities and the same challenges associated with what ends up being measuring risk and measuring risk reduced per unit cost. This is a great one. If you haven't been to Our World in Data, you don't like data. This stuff is fantastic. And that little red line is the USA's expenditure of health compared to its life expectancy in years. And so we have this, here's USA. That looks pretty good, right, on its own. But then we see all these other countries that are way up here. There's Japan right up there. There's Switzerland that are spending a lot less and living a lot longer. Now, there's lots of reasons to argue that stuff, but in the aggregate macro thing, this is the kind of thing that I would love to see for a security program. I want to see my security program, the amount of money I'm spending, and the life expectancy is actually the amount of risk reduced over time as I go. So this is sort of my goal, is like, how do I do that here? If we tried to do it in security, I pulled this, one of my favorite reports ever was, it was called The True Cost of Compliance. You guys see that report? It's probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it's not a data report. Poneman, I like a lot of what Larry Poneman does. A lot of metrics folks and quant folks are not incredibly appreciative sometimes. But he did this report where he asked people, how much do you spend on security and how much are your losses on security. And guess what? They're positively correlated. And so the more you spend, the more you lose. And so what do we know about that? We know that really there's some other variable, right, that's driving that, and it's probably company size and complexity, that kind of thing, right? But this is the best we have, is this sort of thing. You're like, really? The more I spend, the more I lose. I've collected some data on this as well, and really it ends up being something like that, because we're always incurring losses even as we spend money to try to prevent that from happening. So I pull from all sorts of academics and try to figure out what's going on in life. This was done by Tyler Moore. How do firms manage cybersecurity investment? Well, here's a way to talk about drivers of investment, perceived risk reduction. Right? In my mind, I'm glad that's number one, because it should be number one, and in fact, all these other ones are derivative of number one. That is, our goal in life is to reduce the frequency and impact of incidents. Everything else is a derivative of that. When we say, no, really, I just want to be compliant, the compliance folks want to reduce the frequency and impact of incidents. And someone said, well, I want a great reputation. You want a great reputation, so what? You can increase your profit, and you can either increase your revenue or decrease your costs and that kind of stuff as we go. We also have this kind of thing, okay, well, what are your prioritization approaches? See, we got best practices and frameworks and all this stuff, and some of you guys, I'm going to make fun of you a little bit, because we always say, if only we could do the basics. And you know what? I entered this field kind of legitimately in 1993, and you know what I said in 1993? If only we could do the basics. And so there's something not basic about basics, isn't there? Like, this is the aha moments I have when I'm reading about economists, and they go, you know, at some point, you got to say you got to be giving up somehow. There's a trade-off that we're missing, something that we're missing. And I'm actually as pedestrian as it comes when I think about risk, because I think about the old risk model. Risk is a function of threat, vulnerability, and impact in my life. I think of it as a law of nature. Like, you can't actually get away from it even if you want to. You can claim to have gotten away from it, but all of the decisions you're making and all of the approaches you have are really derivative of, I'm trying to reduce the probability that someone's going to attack my systems, the likelihood that they're going to succeed, and the impact associated with that in our environment. Now, the variable that we have that many other places don't have, like the casinos, is that we have an intelligent adversary. So those probabilities can change, right? Things can happen that affect things. Not exactly related, but I want to say this anyways. Listening to a podcast with Theo Epstein on it. Anyone know who Theo Epstein is? General manager of the Cubs. What happened to the Cubs this year? They won the World Series, right? Theo Epstein was also general manager of the Red Sox when they won the World Series. He's a big advocate of sabermetrics, and if you haven't read Moneyball, Moneyball is by Michael Lewis. Moneyball is the greatest security book ever. The greatest security book ever. Because it is us, except applied to baseball, and who the hell actually wants to talk about security? I want to talk about baseball and apply it to security, right? I want to get smarter about that. But when you look at the challenges of people going, well, you know, I was a programmer, so I know application security is the most important thing. And someone else, well, I was a network guy, and you can't believe what those guys could do. Network security is the most important thing. Some people go, well, I'm an identity guy, so identity is the most important thing to do. And we all have these great ideas of what to do, but ultimately, we're back to positive correlation between what we're doing. So if we look at these kind of models, this is the hard part, right? This is stuff we go, yeah, a lot of folks, you guys might even be thinking, that's all a bunch of bullshit. Really, honestly, one of my reactions was, first of all, when I first heard about this, probably mid-90s or so, I was like, oh my gosh, aha. And I think it was Peter Tippett that wrote about it, late 90s in Information Security Magazine, talking about how you would do the quant behind it. And then I was like, yeah, but we can't actually get the numbers behind these types of things, right? So this is part of what we're going to talk about. Calculating likelihood, we're going to talk about calculating losses. Some ideas here. I'm trying to do Freakonomics for security, right? It's like if I say, you know, how much are you going to lose next week on security, or how much do you lose from ransomware attack, someone's going to say what? You can't tell. Who knows? It could be the biggest thing or the littlest thing or blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, oh, I want to kill myself when that happens, because we're supposed to be experts. And if you can't tell, don't expect the users to tell. Don't expect your bosses to tell. let's just jack it all out the window and buy insurance or something, right? Or sell insurance. Maybe we should sell insurance. We're figuring it out. But I want to be very practical in a way. Sometimes we can't get an absolute value of risk, but we can figure out how risk changes, right? This is an analysis that I do when I think about cloud and new architectures, like, okay, what happens to my user base? What happens to the opportunity associated with my resources? What happens to my resources? Where did they get? John Oberheide from Duo, right, was the guy who pointed out the access to virtual machines from multiple parties in the cloud at some point. So we have these opportunities to go, well, maybe what I can do is figure out a relative risk or a change in risk and then wing it from there, right? In my mind, that's not bad. But we can also try to capture risk numbers. These vendors are coming out with some great numbers. When you see the 1 in X kind of thing, so here's phishing rates, 1 in 300 down to 1 in 2,700. We have, I've seen great numbers from Cisco, great numbers from Microsoft. I just finished writing a paper on key risk indicators, which suggests that really you all should be collecting your own numbers on these things and measuring risk. And someone's going to go, yeah, but those aren't my numbers. You know what? Published numbers are a great baseline to start with. So if those aren't your numbers, number one, how do you know that? We know it like it's not 1 in 2,700. Mine's 1 in 2,701, right? Well, it's not exactly that, right? It's different, but what is it? What is your number? How much does it vary month to month, day to day, month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year? Why does it vary like that? Microsoft has some great stuff on their folks that have any malware installed and folks that don't have any malware installed. And like, you see the gap. It's not huge, by the way, but that is the value that we are providing in our organizations overall, right? Is how much can we reduce risk? If I'm the manager of a baseball team, how much can I reduce risk such that I'm going to win the Security World Series? That's what I'm looking for in my environment. We could go at a macro level. This was a great paper. I know you guys already read it, right? Sasha Romanowski's paper, the RAND paper, the only paper in the world that actually estimated risk at levels that were lower than my estimates of risk. I was like, I thought I was the risk-tolerant person. When he came up with it, what he did was he had a big incident database from insurance companies and calculated a number of incidents in some particular industry, and you know what he compared it to? All the companies in that industry. So the risk was a function, the denominator of the risk function was single entity within a particular industry. A perfect way or a good way to measure risk. There's lots of ways to do this where we can get smarter about risk. A lot of times we skip that population number. So I'll give you a silly example. You saw that phishing thing. In phishing, it's actually easy. We can say phishing emails over total emails. But if I say anti-malware, like let's say malware, executable that turns into malware, what do I count? What's the population there? It's all executables, isn't it? Who's going to count all the executables in your environment? You're going to think you feel dumb doing it, don't you? It's sort of dumb that way. But another thing we can do is count number of endpoints, right? You can scope it so many different ways, but you need the good plus bad in order to understand the ratio. If you don't have that, you're in trouble. Now, Jack Jones was smart when he did FAIR, which is a factored analysis of information risk and a way to measure things. All he used was frequency. So all you need actually is the numerator. You don't need the bad stuff. You don't need the good stuff. What I would say is you actually should have both. And there's ways to do this. Now, some folks will say, well, we just got to get qualitative. But it drives me crazy when I go, oh, remember iOS 9.3.5? Patch your iOS now because it's a very, 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 very high risk. I'm like, did you know I never updated my system? I never updated iOS. Can you believe it? Never got hacked. It's amazing to me, but people say, this is a risk. Oh my God. I say, what does that actually mean? Like out of 1,000 systems, how many are compromised? How do we figure that out? People say, well, we don't know. It's really a level of emotion, right? It's an emotional level, and we're always at very high, and the rest of the world is always at very low, and never the two shall meet. But if we could say, like they did in healthcare in this study, meta-study, hey, when you go to the doctor's office, and they say there's a low chance that you're going to get side effects from this particular drug I want to put you on, out of 100 patients, how many people do you think will get side effects from having that drug? And they did this 1,000 times, probably 10,000 times, probably 1,000,000 times. And guess what? Low doesn't mean low. You all have your interpretation of what low actually is. But it's all different. Why wouldn't you want to say low to me is 5 so someone else could say, well, low to me is 2? Why wouldn't you want to do that? I don't understand it, really, to be honest. And we say, well, you can't do that. I go, well, we can do that, and we can get better at it. And in fact, even if we can't do it, it's going to be done to us. Kills me like that. And I cheat a little bit, and I try to go, okay, how am I going to do that in my environment? And I say, okay, well, if we go very low to very high, we can figure that out. And I say, okay, what do you think of as very low frequency and very high frequency? You can just go through this exercise, right? And the answer doesn't matter as much as the consistency matters, as much as the understanding and the communication matters to your environment. By the way, that was healthcare that I showed you, that example, but it happens it's crucial in the intelligence community, right? Because we actually got to know that stuff, especially nowadays. We absolutely have to know that. And so they do the same thing. They refine their model and say, let's put numbers to this stuff so that things make more sense. Very hard in that world. I'm so glad we're in the digital world because it's 10 times harder to do risk assessment with adversaries in the physical world. Can you believe that? Harder. Who knew, right? How about calculating impact and loss? This is one that gets everyone, well, I don't know. What do I care about? What do you guys care about? Reputation, right? I care about the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I'll show you a survey I did on that. What does that actually mean? Does that mean what you really care about is your CEO is going to go to the club and people are going to laugh at him? And I mean, that's okay, but you should acknowledge that, right? You should, and you don't have to acknowledge it to him because he's never going to acknowledge it, right, in your environment. But it's okay for us to have different notions of what value is. How much will you pay? Write it down right now. How much would you pay for a 32-ounce fountain soda Diet Coke? Well, some of you don't care, don't like Diet Coke. You pay $0, right? I might pay up to $7 if I'm at a baseball game or something like that. I just went down to the street to the taco shack and paid $2.50, I think, you know? And I had free drinks right here. So that idea of what's valuable and what isn't is really okay for individuals to decide that. In economic entities, you need a consensus for what's okay and what's not okay, for that kind of stuff. But we can tease this stuff out if we think about in economics, they have two different concepts that are important. One is stated preference versus revealed preference, so that is what you say you do versus what you actually do. And another is willingness to pay versus willingness to accept. So they would use techniques associated with contingent valuation in order to get to the value of, say, the view from a mountaintop that's looking to be leveled and developed over with skyscrapers, right? How much is that actually worth? You think we had it hard, right? That stuff is like, oh my gosh, that stuff is crazy. And so the NOAA actually put together a task force of economists to figure out how to think about this stuff. And there's no right answer or wrong answer. There's only a valid approach to thinking about it and a legitimate concern and interest in it that matters much more than that. What's a life worth? You know, Kenneth, I'm going to forget his name now. I think didn't he just get fired from Baylor? What's the guy's name? He's always doing the negotiations. He's a lawyer. I can't believe, huh?
Ken Starr.
Ken Starr. I thought it was Starr, but I was like, had to decide how much to distribute to the victims of 9/11. Right? Hey, life doesn't matter. Life is life. I'll spend whatever it takes to save a life. And then the practical matter is you don't have whatever it takes. Right? Sometimes you lose a life. And sometimes you want to compensate victims, and so we have these, this was from the New York Times, we have a methodological approach in a book called What's a Life Worth that Kenneth Starr wrote about the 9/11 victims, and the process he went through to figure out something that is impossible to figure out, right? You still got to do it. Net Diligence did it for us too. Net Diligence, you know what they do? They keep track of, they talk to all the insurance companies and they look at all the insurance payouts. So these has nothing to do with reputation, it has to do with payouts. It's typically cost-based stuff more than any kind of value-based stuff or anything like that. So in my mind, this might be a good low value estimate to use for possible impact in various things. And they have a lot of other stuff. This is actually the Romanowski paper too. By the way, Sasha Romanowski from RAND. I apologize, when I was making some of these slides, I didn't always do a great job in sourcing it, which is a big no-no, as I know. So my apologies there. I basically didn't do any of this. How great is that? I did do this one, though. One of the things I thought is, as I try to cheat, right, I'm Freakonomics, I'm going, okay, how can I get value from folks that will say, you can't tell value? And I can ask them a list of 20 different questions that I'm looking to create a canonical set of impact questions for two reasons. Number one is, a lot of folks say, you know what my biggest risk is? It's not having multi-factor authentication. And I immediately go, oh my gosh, that person needs to go stand over here because he doesn't understand risk. That's not your biggest, it's never your biggest risk. That is only an opportunity to reduce risk put into your environment. The risk is associated with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So if I can create a cheated set, I'm happy to share this stuff with you. I apologize if the details aren't quite there. And what comes out and ask folks, on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, rate these things based on impact on a scale of 1 to 10. I hate doing that. But it's the only thing we can do. It's really, honestly, the only thing we can do in today's field. You get these great answers, right? What do they care about the most? Breach disclosure on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. You know what else they care about? Here's Target style breach. Here's Sony style breach. Guess what? They're on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. How could it possibly be that they care less about that, and yet one subset of that is up higher? So one of the things, I don't mean to be rude to these folks, but there's a lot of bias out there, and we need to separate out the emotion from the analysis. And so the reason I asked this was so I could say, see this one? Unrecoverable wire transfer of $250,000. Can you quantify the impact of that? I'm going to give you a hint. It's $250,000. And so if I can draw a line and say, oh, above the line, greater than 250,000. Below the line, less than, right? I made a mistake here, and I'm still trying to figure out, there's so many different sizes of companies, it's really hard to do. I want a canonical set of these that is just like, oh yeah, everyone has a way to think about this stuff. And I started at, look, $10,000 worth of goods not received. At the lowest level, it doesn't matter because everything is above $10,000, even for the smallest entities out there. But you have various levels of items that can be, where the losses can be calculated versus not. So we're backing into these numbers and these impacts to whatever extent we can. I have other methods as well, by the way, that are, you know, just kind of the analytical process you go through. And so many times people will say, you know, I'll spend whatever it takes. It doesn't matter. You can't calculate it. It's 0 to 1 million. And I'm like, well, do you have an unlimited budget? Do you have, you know, like whatever? Where are we going to go here? And one of the techniques I like to use, again, repeat after me, not my technique. Risk reduced per unit cost, by the way, the first time I heard it was a guy named Anthony Cox, who is a genius quantitative risk guy, knows nothing about IT security, essentially. He's a telecom guy, so he knows a lot about technology, but he knows everything about risk, because we've had all these same problems in environmental risk and nuclear risk and chemical risk and everything else. There's loads of this stuff out there that we can learn from and apply the techniques. And you know what we say? No. We're different. We are different. And so we want to start from scratch to create all this stuff ourselves. It's all right here. It's been done for us. Thank you so much. So the break-even technique, another RAND paper from years ago, I'll show you the source in a second, is the value of something has to be worth at least as much as you're willing to spend on it. So if you have $1 million budget, you got to be reducing risk, but you're placing a bet that you're going to reduce risk by at least $1 million. And the truth is, we actually want more than that, right? Your financial guys in financial services would say, well, weighted average cost of capital, blah, 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 blah. If we can't get anything back for our money, it's not even worth it, right? So I have an opportunity to draw a line on a continuum here based on losses and probability of losses and create a frontier. And now you know what I only have to do? I got to go above the line or below the line. If the actual risk that I'm calculating is above the line, I'm in because there's value there. If it's below the line, nope, no can do in my environment, right? So conceptually, that's what we put together. And in fact, it's even easier if you're a finance guy like me. I got spreadsheets out the wazoo on this stuff, and I go, okay, well, do I need to make a list, do I need to make a profit associated with my cost, meaning spend less money? Do I want to reduce risk even more? What's my break-even point? You don't see the rest. Conceptually, the idea here is this stuff changes dynamically based on how much you spend and what your calculations are associated with the risk. And you guys are now saying, like my CIO said, yeah, no, really, what is it? But really, this is what we're doing even if we don't know it in our environment. This is my favorite risk paper of all time. I encourage you guys to go look at it. Remember when TSA and Secure Flight, we were laughing at them, what numbnuts they were for employing all the MRI sensors and whatever we had at for the TSA. Well, guess what? At least they did a quantitative risk analysis on the likelihoods of this stuff happening. They came up with 4 different scenarios, A, B, C, and D. They created 2 lines. To be honest, I don't remember the details around the lines because all I'm pitching here is the concept, right? You don't have to know the numbers. You have to understand, well, you create a few scenarios. If you're really good, you run some Monte Carlo analysis. You get Doug Hubbard's book on how to measure anything, which is a fantastic book for this kind of thing. And you start doing above the line and below the line. This is where I stole the Rand report description of how we do this stuff. Now, Sunil had his model of security. Here's an old model that I use for things. Just had to get that in there. Lots of other tests, because now we have to think about how are we going to apply what we need in a security program and how are we going to evaluate it. Well, if you have inline controls, guess what? The modeling work's already done for us again. The epidemiologists use it. The information management folks use it. All sorts of folks use this stuff, and it's based on I'm going to predict an outcome, and there's actually going to be an outcome. And if I predicted negative and the outcome was negative, then that's a true negative. If I predicted negative and the outcome was positive, then that's a false positive, right? And so all this stuff is already done for us. See these 4 boxes here? The only 4 outcomes your antivirus can have, your firewall can have, your authentication can have, anything that's essentially deterministic, right? It's inline, it has inputs and outputs, and is making decisions for you in very specific ways. So anyone know the control efficacy of their security program? No, we don't, right? Because we don't look at it. And every once in a while, after 30 years of signature-based antivirus, you know that stuff doesn't work. But we know it works in single instances, right? It's the aggregate stuff where sometimes things don't work, and we find out that things are challenging. So, for example, every time your help desk does a password reset, what is it? It's a false positive. It's a control failure. Do you know that? And we're like, oh no, wait, how do we know that? How do we know that? Well, presumably the help desk is going to do some work to legitimize the claim and make it all work out. Already there. Now sometimes we can't do that, right? So I back into it and I say, on a scale of 1 to 5 for these 30 control items, give me the cost associated with it and give me the amount of risk it's reduced. And I can plot this stuff out, and we can go from higher benefit and lower cost down to lower benefit and higher cost and measure these things out here. In my mind, this is inadequate. We could do it. I hope you guys consider doing it at the very least, these kind of relative measures to try to figure things out. And what happens is you start going, that's a bunch of bullshit. I think multi-factor isn't the most important item. I think such and such is. And then you can go through the analysis and peel the onion, right? Get down to lower layers on this. What I hope for is stuff that Nathaniel Boggs and Sal Stolfo did at, you guys know him, right? Where's he at? NYU? No, Columbia University. Can we put together portfolios of controls in our environment to find the maximum effectiveness one so I can win the World Series of Security, right? Which one of these options, World Series of Security? I got to be careful. This isn't exactly what I was talking about. This is all about the bad stuff, does not include the good stuff. And even better, what about healthcare? If I say, if I do a meta-analysis on 500 life-saving interventions to include things like asbestos removal and putting a fire extinguisher under a sink and wearing a seat belt and all sorts of chemical-related stuff, I can create a distribution of the amount of money it costs us to save a single life year. And sometimes it's $0, and sometimes it's, what, anyone know what 10 to the 10th is? What's 10 to the 9th? 100 million? A billion? Sometimes it's a lot of money to save this stuff. And so I want to work from the left to the right as I get smarter with security, and I can put my own distribution together to figure out what the risk reduced per unit cost is in my environment. So I have some thoughts, right? We're not a special snowflake. We have some characteristics that are very interesting and we need to account for, in particular the intelligent adversary. And things change with that. We can't be precise. Some of you are going, this is too complex to do that. And on one hand, you go, well, we got the input side and the output side. Ignore everything in between at this level because we haven't gotten there. We just haven't gotten there. So stop thinking about the exceptions and start thinking about what is the rule and the baseline I can drive so I can find the exceptions to it. People having different ideas of value is perfectly fine, perfectly reasonable, happens every day. Even the most liquid item on earth, currency, has foreign exchange rates. How can that be, right? How can I have every day, and really even throughout the day, foreign currency changing in value all the time, right? It just happens. That's how that's intended to be. With economic entities, if you care about reputation, really you should be caring about it because there's some impact on revenue, some impact on costs. And it doesn't feel good, but it's the truth of an economic entity in our environment. And oh, by the way, all this stuff, it's like, oh my gosh, this stuff is so complex. We're doing it anyway. Anytime we say, yep, I just got approval to spend $10,000, you just made a claim that you're going to reduce risk by at least $10,000. Let's get better at it. Sound good? Are you guys in? You loving life? All right. Thank you very much. I don't know if I have time for questions. I didn't see in anything. Whoops. Oh, boy.
If you're not aware of him, John Garrett deals with very hard to calculate risks, like power plants, chemical weapons, and 3 Mile Island. Amazing guy.
Yeah, I haven't heard the number. Great stuff out there on terrorism, risks associated with terrorism.
Yeah, he's it. John Garrett, look him up.
John Garrett, sounds great. Yeah, so we can do, and by the way, I think I had one thing on there on intervals, confidence intervals, right? We're talking about predicting the future, so it's not like we're going to have a level of precision, but the person with the smallest interval is the expert. So, for example, if I say what year was Einstein born in, give me a range of years that he was born in. The person with the lowest number of years in the difference is the expert on Einstein's birth. So that's what economists say. That so if we're the experts, our intervals could be large, but they should be right more often than the pedestrian folks that are in there talking about security, right? Otherwise, maybe we're not the experts. Great. Any other questions? Am I done? Thank you.